What is the top obstacle to peaceful coexistence of Israelis and Palestinians? Let's talk about the big question of peace in this part of the world.
Mm. Well, I think the reason you have the persistence of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which goes back about a century, is the persistent Palestinian refusal to recognize a Jewish state, a nation state for the Jewish people in any boundary. That's why they opposed the establishment of the state of Israel before we had a state, and that's why they've opposed it after we had a state. They opposed it when we didn't have Judea and Samaria, the West Bank in our heads, and Gaza, and they oppose it after we have it. Doesn't make a difference. It's basically their persistent refusal to recognize a Jewish state in any boundaries. And I think their tragedy is that they've been commandeered for a century by leadership that refused to compromise with the idea of Zionism, namely that the Jews deserve a state in this part of the world. The territorial dispute is something else. You have a territorial dispute if you say, okay, you're living on this side, we're living on that side, let's decide where the border is, and so on. That's not what the argument is. The Palestinian society, which is itself fragmented, but all the factions agree there shouldn't be a Jewish state anywhere, okay? They just disagree between Hamas that says, oh, well, you should have it, we should get rid of it with terror, and the others who say, well, no, we should also use political means to dissolve it. So that is the problem.
So even as part of a two-state solution, they're still against the idea.
Well, they don't want a state next to Israel. They want a state instead of Israel. And they say, if we get a state, we'll use it as a springboard to destroy the smaller Israeli state, which is what happened when Israel unilaterally walked out of Gaza and effectively established a Hamas state there. They didn't say, oh, good, now we have our own territory, our own state. Israel is no longer there. Let's build peace. Let's build, economic projects. Let's enfranchise our people. No, they turned it into a terror bastion from which they fired 10,000 rockets into Israel. When Israel left Lebanon, because we had terrorist attacks from there, then we had Lebanon taken over by Hezbollah, a terrorist organization that seeks to destroy Israel. And therefore, every time we just walked out, what we got was not peace. We didn't give, territory for peace. We got territory for terror. That's what we had. And that's what would happen as long as the reigning ideology says we don't want Israel in any border. So the idea of two states assumes that you'd have on the other side a state that wants to live in peace and not one that will be overtaken by Iran and its proxies in 2 seconds and become a base to destroy Israel. And therefore, I think that most Israelis today, if you ask them, they'd say it's not going to work in that concept. So what do you do? What do you do with the Palestinians? Okay, they're still there, and unlike them, I don't want to throw them out. They're going to be living here, and we're going to be living here in an area which is, by the way, just to understand, the entire area of so-called West Bank and Israel is the width of the Washington Beltway, more or less, just a little more, not much more. You can't really divide it up. You can't say, well, you're going to fly in. Who controls the airspace? Well, it takes you about 2.5 minutes to cross it with a regular 747. Okay, with a fighter plane, it takes you 1.5 minutes. Okay, so you're not. How are you going to divide the airspace? Well, you're not going to divide it. Israel's going to control that airspace and the electromagnetic space, and so on. So security has to be in the hands of Israel. My view of how you solve this problem is a simple principle. The Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves and none of the powers to threaten Israel, which basically means that the responsibility for overall security remains with Israel. And from a practical point of view, we've seen that every time that Israel leaves a territory and takes its security forces out of an area, it immediately is overtaken by Hamas or Hezbollah or jihadists who basically are committed to the destruction of Israel and also bring misery to the Palestinians or Arab subjects. So I think that that principle is less than perfect sovereignty. because you're taking a certain amount of powers, sovereign powers, especially security, away. But I think it's the only practical solution. So people say, but it's not a perfect state. I said, okay, call it what you will. Call it, I don't know, limited sovereignty, call it autonomy plus, call it whatever you want to call it. But that's the reality. And right now, if you ask Israelis across the political spectrum, except the very hard left, most Israelis agree with that. They don't really debate it.
So a two-state solution where Israel controls the security of the entire region.
We don't call it quite that. I mean, there are different names, but the idea is, yes, Israel controls security in it's the entire area. It's this tiny area between the Jordan River and the sea. I mean, it's like, you can walk it in not one afternoon. If you're really fit, you can do it in a day. Less than a day. I did.
So the expansion of settlements in the West Bank has been a top priority for this new government. Many harshly criticize this as contributing to escalating the Israel-Palestine tensions.
Yeah, well,
can you understand that perspective that this expansion of settlements is not good for this two-state solution?
Yeah, I can understand. I can understand what they're saying, and they don't understand why they're wrong. First, most Israelis who live in Judea, Samaria, live in urban blocks, and that accounts for about 90% of the population. Okay, and everybody recognizes that those urban blocks are going to be part of Israel in any future arrangement. So they're really arguing about something that has already been decided and agreed upon, really by Americans, even by Arabs, many Arabs. They don't think that Israel is going to dismantle these blocks. You look outside the window here, and within about a mile from here, is you have Jerusalem. Half of Jerusalem grew naturally beyond the old 1967 border. So you're not going to dismantle half of Jerusalem. That's not going to happen. And most people don't expect that. Then you have the other 10% scattered in tiny, in small communities. And people say, well, you're going to have to take them out. Why? Why? Remember that in 1967 Israel, we have over 1.5 million Arabs here. We don't say, Israel has to be ethnically cleansed from Arabs from its Arab citizens in order to have peace. Of course not. Jews can live among Arabs and Arabs can live among Jews. And what is being advanced by those people who say that we can't live in our ancestral homeland in these disputed areas? Nobody says that this is Palestinian areas. And nobody says that these are Israeli areas. We claim them. They claim them. We've only been attached to this land for, 3,500 years. But, but it's a dispute. I agree. But I don't agree that we should throw out the Arabs, and I don't think that they should throw out the Jews. And if somebody said to you, the only way we're going to have peace with Israel is to have an ethnically cleansed Palestinian entity, that's outrageous. If you said the only way you shouldn't have Jews living in, in suburbs of London or New York and so on, I don't think that will play too well. The world is actually advancing a solution that says that Jews cannot live among Arabs and Arabs cannot live among Jews. I don't think that's the right way to do it. And I think there's a solution out there, but I don't think we're going to get to it, which is less than perfect sovereignty, which involves Israeli security maintained for the entire territory by Israel, which involves not rooting out anybody, not kicking out, uprooting Arabs or Palestinians. They're going to live in enclaves in sovereign Israel, and we're going to live probably in enclaves there, probably through transportational continuity as opposed to territorial continuity. That is, for example, you can have tunnels and overpasses and so on that connect the various communities. We're doing that right now. And it actually works. I think there is a solution to this. It's not the perfect world that people think of, because that model, I think, doesn't apply here. If it applies elsewhere, it's a question. I don't think so. But I think there's one other thing, and that's the main thing that I've been involved in. People said, if you don't solve the Palestinian problem, you're not going to get to the Arab world. You're not going to have peace with the Arab world. Remember, the Palestinians are about 2% of the Arab world. And the other 98%, you're not going to make peace with them. And that's our goal. And for a long time, people accepted that. After the initial peace treaties with Egypt, with Prime Minister Begin of the Likud and President Sadat of Egypt, and then with Jordan, between Prime Minister Rabin and King Hussein. For a quarter of a century, we didn't have any more peace treaties because people said, you got to go through the Palestinians. And the Palestinians, they don't want a solution of the kind that I described, or any kind except the one that involved the dissolution of the State of Israel. So we could wait another half century. And I said, no. I mean, I don't think that we should accept the premise that we have to wait for the Palestinians because we'll have to wait forever. So I decided to do it differently. I decided to go directly to the Arab capitals and to make the historic Abraham Accords and essentially reversing the equation, not a peace process that goes inside out, but outside in. And we went directly to these countries and forged these breakthrough peace accords with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and with Sudan. And we're now trying to expand that in a quantum leap with Saudi Arabia.
What does it take to do that with Saudi Arabia, with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman?
You know, I'm a student of history, and I read a lot of history, and I read that, in the Versailles discussions after World War I, President Woodrow Wilson said, I believe in open covenants openly arrived at. I have my correction. I believed in open covenants secretly arrived at. So we're not going to advance a Saudi-Israeli peace by having it publicly discussed. And in any case, it's a decision of the Saudis if they want to do it. But there's obviously a mutual interest. So here's my view. If we try to wait for the 2% in order to get to the 98%, we're going to fail, and we have failed. If we go to the 98%, we have a much greater chance of persuading the 2%. You know why? Because the 2%, the Palestinian hope to vanquish the State of Israel and not make peace with it, is based, among other things, on the assumption that eventually the 98%, the rest of the Arab world, will kick in and destroy the Jewish state, help them dissolve or destroy the Jewish state. When that hope is taken away, then you begin to have a turn to the realistic solutions of coexistence. By the way, they'll require compromise on the Israeli side too, and I'm perfectly cognizant of that and willing to do that. But I think a realistic compromise will be struck much more readily when the conflict between Israel and the Arab states, the Arab world, is effectively solved. And I think we're on that path. It was a conceptual change, just like, I've been involved in a few. I told you the conceptual battle is always the most difficult one. And, I had to fight this battle to convert a semi-socialist state into a free market capitalist state. And I have to say that most people today recognize the power of competition and the benefits of free markets. So we also had to fight this battle that said you have to go through the Palestinian strait, Strait, to get to the other places. There's no way to avoid this. You have to go through this impassable pass. And I think that now people are recognizing that we'll go around it and probably circle back. And that, I think, actually gives hope not only to have an Arab-Israeli peace, but circling back an Israeli-Palestinian peace. And obviously, this is not something that you find in the in the sound bites and so on, but in the popular discussion of the press. But that idea is permeating, and I think it's the right idea because I think it's the only one that will work.
So expanding the circle of peace, just to linger on that, requires what? Secretly talking man to man, human to human, to leaders of other nations. And
theoretically, you're right.
Theoretically. Okay.